But I want just to draw your attention also on the front page of the Daily Nation as we're talking about indebtedness. And I think now we are done with the politics. Can we look at the people where they're really concerned as far as the livelihood is? It looks, right? There's a bleak outlook there. We have Treasury's warning on hard times as debt burden grows. This is on page 8 of the Daily Nation, and it says that Kenyans, beg your pardon, it says Kenyans should prepare for higher taxes and more inflationary pressure to meet the demands of country's debt repayment obligations. And 2.48 trillion shillings gross domestic debt increased by 366.5 billion shillings for the period 2017 to 2018, and 2.66 trillion shillings external public debt increased by 527 billion shillings for the period 2017-2018. And of course, you can see it is going higher and higher and higher. 331.6 billion shillings cumulative external financing for the period 2017-2018, and 273.7 billion shillings net domestic borrowing for the period 2017-2018. This is a staggering amount, and we've had Treasury not, of course, admitting that we've crossed the red line. As far as they're concerned, we're still, of course, on the safe zone as far as this debt is concerned. But there has been a big question, and this is in light of also the Building Bridges initiative that we do know is in the offing, and it's been given a one-year period. And so far, we understand also there's lack of financing or resources for this particular initiative as well. Can we just tackle and talk about this in light of what is happening? Comes September the 1st, many Kenyans also will be suffering because of fuel prices that will go up. We know this will also cascade down to food products, matatu, transport. I mean, things will just be very expensive in this country. Are we teetering on the brink of economic crisis as far as debt is concerned? Let's just be very candid this morning as we, of course, try to tackle this for the next half an hour.
Interestingly, Debarl, if today was not a holiday, the Finance Bill 2018 would have come for second reading in the National Assembly, which has everything to do with this kind of discussion that you're having this morning. And interestingly so, and this is why members of the public shouldn't see some of the decisions that we make as if it is obsession with politics. It is because it has an influence on this. If we were to follow up and link this to the earlier debate we were having about party leadership and why they should take certain positions. For example, take an example. When Finance Bill 2018 is tabled on the floor of Parliament this afternoon, or for this case tomorrow afternoon, as a party, as a member of a political party, do you just vote with your decision that has been made by your party leader and say that we want to tax our way into prosperity? Or do you first recede back into your conscience and look at the people that you represent and speak for them before speaking for party? This forms an obvious basis for this debate, because for a long time, Kenyans have complained that we are paying far too much taxes, and we feel that the same do not translate into tangible services. For example, you'd expect that for the amount of taxes Kenyans are paying, the cost of fuel will be way lower, and when you go to hospitals, you get better services and not have to pay through an arm and a leg the way we are getting to pay. So the cardinal, the point of debate, there are certain things that when we come to look at it, this particular debate is, what is the position of you as a leader and the people that you represent? There are two things that I'd want to point out in relation to this kind of debt. What is government trying to do when it raises amounts, huge amounts of money through ways and means that are not, of course, in tandem with the wishes of the people? Of interest and great debate, for example, as part of the proposals that are being made, is to repeal the very famous interest rates law that the Finance Bill of 2018 proposes that we should scrap it now and revert back to the old days where banks used to charge in excess of 24 to 25% for loans that are borrowed. I do not expect any member of parliament that has the interest of the people that he represents at heart to support that kind of legislation. It will be taking this country back. It will be absolutely wrong and immoral, if I may say, if as a leader you stand up to support that kind of thinking. On the issue of external debt, because
Yes.
that should be our biggest cause of worry. Economically speaking, if we borrow internally, chances are the economies of scale will self-regulate to a point that they will get to a point where there is nothing more to borrow. The danger actually, to me, lies more in the external debt, because a time will come, as we've been reading lately, where as a country we may find that our first charge on our budget, that is, which is to pay debt,
Yes.
may be far more than even the vote on development. Right now it's still safe because we are keeping it at less than 40%. But if we keep on borrowing to this level, and this is where we must keep Treasury in check and ask the hard questions, notwithstanding, never minding that the likes of Murathe would wish that we sing and say that whatever government has decided as Jubilee legislators, we should support it. I think a time has come for us to say, Treasury, can you match your borrowing with the services to Mwananchi? Can we first see that for this amount that we have consumed, this 3 to 4 trillion shillings, what is the return? Can we first stop and hold our borrowing until a point where we say that we are comfortably seeing the results of our borrowing?
Yes.
Then we can now go out to borrow. That should form the basis of our discussion when we begin this debate in Parliament tomorrow.
All right, but the argument has always been advanced that the trajectory will come later, you know, as in the trajectory maybe of the SGR, the way we've borrowed money. We know we'll realize the benefits of SGR much later, but not in the foreseeable or the short-term period that we are looking at as well.
They say figures do not lie. Let Treasury table the figures for us, at least that are in tandem with their projections. Let us see that for the debt for SGR, for example, this is what we projected for 2018-2019. Then we can easily compare and say, if you're projecting that you will be carrying 1 million tons of cargo by 2018, let us see how much you're carrying.
Right. So can we really say that we're looking at a very healthy balance sheet as far as Kenya is concerned?
Well, I don't know about a healthy balance sheet, but I know that it is not necessarily a bad balance sheet. Now, you know, Debarl, it is good to ask ourselves a number of questions when it comes to government, macro and microeconomic, especially macroeconomics. The issue here is this, Debarl.
Yes.
A, what are we borrowing for? Because the worst thing that you can do as, in any borrowing format is to borrow to consume. If you borrow to consume, you will sink. And if you look at the economies of nations that have collapsed, all the way from Greece when it was collapsing to Venezuela today, you know, etc., etc., you will find that a lot of those nations borrowed to consume, which means that you are living way beyond your means. So if you can borrow in production-oriented areas, it is possible for you to service the debts. And of course, you must be careful so that the amount of money you are paying is that money which you can be able to repay. Now, where I think we might be going wrong is where you cannot borrow money and instead of repaying with the sources of income for whatever you borrowed, you go to the wananchis and tax them more, you know, so that they can pay for the, you know, for the debts that you have accumulated. And I think that is what is beginning to happen today. So that we are borrowing money for long-term projects, but with terms which mean that we have to pay currently. We are not, you know, the repayment that we have is current, while the projection of the incomes from the projects that we have put forward are long-term in nature. Therefore, I think that, I agree with the latest directive by the President that let us not have new projects. Because effectively what you'd be doing is overextending yourself. If you look at our debt ratios at the moment, we are way below many countries in the world. We are way below Japan and other nations. But the point is that it's not a question of how much you owe. It's a question of your ability to pay. You know, what is the ability to service the debt? And every time we are talking about debts, let's always remember that Kenyans, we always want to talk about what they want to spend. They want a new road, they want a new hospital, they want a new this, and they want a new the other. The question has always been, where is the debate about where this money is coming from? Is this money going to come from tourism? And therefore, how much money are we putting in tourism? Is this money going to come from transport and saving the roads? For example, when you do a railway, it means that you can save the expenditure on maintenance of roads. And that's why in most countries on earth, civilized nations anywhere, we always have a railway system. And a railway system cannot be priced just on its own per se. You know, it has got to be priced within the framework of how much money you are saving in terms of maintenance of roads, how much time you are saving people to travel from one place to the other. You know, so it is a holistic cost rather than just a singular cost, and the benefits must be calculated as such. So, Debarl, what we are saying is, I think that we should not be going for any consumption-oriented projects by way of borrowing. If you are going to tax people then for consumption. If you are going to be taxed more, let's be taxed so that our hospitals can be beefed up, so that our schools can be beefed up, but not for external borrowing, not for external debt servicing, because then that is unsustainable. Our debt servicing should be coming from the proceeds, from the incomes we are getting from the projects that we borrowed for.
Thank you. Boni Khalwale.
I couldn't have put it better than what Mutahi has said, but not surprising because of his kind of background. But let me push it a little bit further. There is something called logic. Logic demands that A, it is government which went into wanton borrowing. And B, that it is government which is now crying wolf that hard times ahead because of the borrowing which themselves did. So logic demands that we say it is government to blame. Members of the public, if it was in if it was in Western democracies, the government would be saying that we should go to a general election so that we replace it that are unable to manage the affairs of the state. However, because we are where we are, let me just emphasize one point. What was the money that they borrowed used for? Had it been clearly thought out, then using standard gauge rail line as an example, then the money that was put into the standard gauge rail line should by now not be a burden to the taxpayer. It should be the standard gauge rail line now starting to pay back or pay off for that loan. But then what happened? In the case of the standard gauge rail line, a good excellent idea, but jokers then, instead of allowing the original thinking to be the one that was being funded, because of greed to try and make easy money, they have now gotten a project which is half complete, to the extent that whether it takes 100 years or whatever number of years, if the standard gauge rail line does not move from Mombasa to Malaba, to Kampala, to Kigali and Bujumbura, it will never pay off, because it is supposed to lift cargo from the port in Mombasa to those points, then for it to be. But if you do it because you are lifting cargo from Mombasa to Nairobi, it will never pay off.
It will never pay off.
Thank you.
Let's hear from Dr. Otiende Amollo.
On this, I agree completely with Dr. Khalwale. Despite the handshake,
Yes.
and especially before the handshake, we have said consistently, and I'm quite happy to hear Senator Cheruiyot drifting in this direction. We said before the last election, 2017, we said after the election that the administration was over-borrowing. The debt burden was rising beyond what we can manage as a country. So that even by the time we were going to Eurobond 2, we in ODM vehemently spoke against it,
Yes.
even on this show. I still maintain that the government, this government, and the previous regime have put us at a level of debt that we should not have gone to. It is far too high. And what's worse is that apart from over-borrowing, there's also the question of misuse of the monies that are borrowed. There's the question of value for money. Whether that money that was borrowed has been put to optimal use. And in almost each of those cases, you find that there are questions. As we speak now, the audit queries on Eurobond 1 are yet to be answered.
Yes.
I think sometimes we forget that to date, there has been no audited report on Eurobond 1 before you come to Eurobond 2. If you look at the SGR that Dr. Khalwale has spoken to, there are so many issues about it. There are so many issues around the question of the cost. If you compare the cost of what they did in Ethiopia and in other countries, you find ours is way beyond. And it does not help that even beyond that traditional cost, there are additional costs that keep rising. As the railway line keeps coming, then you have the National Land Commission buying land in exorbitant prices,
yes,
imaginary government land, and so the cost just keeps going higher and higher. It is unfortunate that at all material time when we kept raising these matters, the bodies that should have helped us speak on this, the Bretton Woods institutions, instead of speaking to it, were encouraging government. And they kept saying that we could still sustain more debt. I think it's only Moody's that spoke against it. But suddenly, after we've really stretched, then they wake up, the World Bank, I think the IMF, then they say, now your debt levels are too high. And as it was being raised, they didn't speak against it. And I think it is quite unfortunate. The solution that is supposed is taxation, with the result that Kenyans are, I think, one of the heaviest taxed individuals in the world. Overtaxation of persons who are already overstretched cannot be a solution to overborrowing, in my view. Mm-hmm. And in that respect, I agree with Senator Cheruiyot. When it comes to this thing of bank caps, and it's going to come back to Parliament soon, tomorrow actually, I am one of those who will oppose it. And I will oppose it because for the longest time I practiced as an advocate. Banks in this country had been raking and have been raking immoral amounts of money from persons who have borrowed. And you will find a situation where one has borrowed 2 million, interest alone is 10 million. So your property that is valued at 8 million is being sold at 4 million because you had borrowed 2 million. It's immoral. And therefore, when parliamentarians before my time decided that the solution was to put a cap, I think it is reasonable. The argument being made now that no, it's not helping the economy and all, they should have been able to control those immoral interest rates when they had the opportunity. But you can now not come and say, we promise that this time we will make them reasonable, when previously you didn't. So yeah. I stand, and I'm one of those who will oppose it. We must maintain those caps.
All right, we must maintain those caps on the interest rate, the repealing that, of course, is one of the options that is on the table as well. Let's hear from Senator Wamatangi, briefly.
Yes, Debarl, in the autobiography of Lee Kuan Yew, he recites in memory a visit he made to Sri Lanka when it was called Ceylon. And in his visit, he says that he took a trip from the airport, was invited to their equal of State House, was given a bowl of soup to take. On his way to his hotel, he was waving at people, by the roadside, children and women. And by the time he arrived at the guest house, he knew the kind of economy he was talking about, or he was looking at, and he knew the kind of country that he was about to get into. And what I would want to say is that if you want to know and find out what kind of economy is a country in at that time, you don't need to go to the central bank. You just need to look at the lives of the people. And if you get the indicators from just the face of what you see from the citizens, then that tells you whether you are looking at an economy that is upward, that is stagnant, or that's on a downturn. And so, Debarl, a few things I may want to say quickly though. One is that, yes, from the figures quoted here, it's true that the government has borrowed and borrowed quite a lot. The one thing that would be of curiosity would be the domestic borrowing quotient of the entire borrowing, because one, the domestic borrowing is really what will then be a kickstart to most of the negative factors that will affect the local people. And just when on that, one would be asking themselves two questions. First is, all this money that has been borrowed, where is it going? And in reference to the first statement that I made, you'd be asking, is it helping entirely in reducing the gap between those who have and those who don't have? And my answer would be that we are not yet there. Because if you ask me, where precisely would we be saying that we have applied a lot of our funds to make sure that we are reaping the benefits at the base level, for that matter? Not in seeing how many how many spiral highways we have, but of course I'm not saying that the focus on investment in infrastructure is misplaced. Actually, it is one of the main ones. But if you look at, for example, and this is my view, if you look at, for example, the push we have applied in ensuring, for example, that the cost of energy in this country, which is consumed by almost all of us as citizens and determines almost the price of everything. And I'm saying energy holistically because it is already reported in the press that we're expecting a rise in fuel prices very, very soon. And so one would be asking themselves, is our gun trained on the bull's eye? What would cause significant change, wholly across the nation? And I believe, in my view, that we need to apply a lot much more focus. But we also must agree that there has been a few issues that have stood in our way. One, this fight against corruption, Debarl. Whether we say it or we don't say it, corruption is one of the big things issues that we have to look at, because no matter how much we apply our funds to any other area, as long as corruption still remains, that we borrow 300 billion and a quarter of it is pilfered, and it has to be repaid back with interest, I believe that we have to do more. Lastly,
thank you.
Let me just make one final comment on the question of interest rates, because Debarl, last week banks were announcing the profits they have made, and the profits they announced last week were in spite of the bill that we have, and if the interest rates, and if you listened to or saw the kind of profits that they spoke about very big profits. Actually equal to what they made before this law was in place. So what you would be asking yourself is, where are they making the money now that this law is in place? And the answer is very simple, that they tilted their borrowing clients from the local masses to government and to big borrowers.
Thank you.
And does that help the economy?
Right. We should be winding up. Let's start with our
I think two things. I support the parliamentarians completely, both the Senate and the National Assembly.
Mr. Kagwe, this serves also as your closing remarks.
Absolutely.
Right, please.
On the issue of maintaining the cap in this, because Debarl, what we must have as a government holistically is we must work backwards to produce pro-poor policies. This is essentially a poor country. So my closing remark is, whatever decision we are going to make, adding fuel taxes, that is not a pro-poor policy, because it is going to it is going to increase prices of food, etc., because of inflation. A pro-poor policy would have looked at all these massive cars that we have, Boni has and these guys have, and tax them seriously and save the fuel taxation, so that food does not become expensive.
Thank you.
It's let us adopt pro-poor policies.
Okay. Aaron Cheruiyot, your closing remarks.
I liken the minds in our treasury to a man chewing gum, and when they get to a staircase, they stop chewing, scale up the staircase, only to continue chewing after finishing. What I'm saying is that there's absolute lack of creativity in how we run the Treasury of the Republic of Kenya. For example, Debarl, I want to question and wonder, help me unravel this ministry. Why doesn't it bother them that you are building SGR all the way from Mombasa, say, to Kisumu, that shall be transporting goods that have been made in other countries just like Kenya, and doing absolutely nothing to ensure that as this railway turns in Kisumu to return to Mombasa, it is going back with goods that have been produced locally.
Yes.
There are no policies to push, you know, that kind of innovation. And therefore, it is, I think time has come for us to change the minds as Treasury and replace them with more progressive and creative minds that are pro-poor, to borrow the words of Senator Kagwe, and understand the kind of economy that you are working
Dr. Otiende.
Well, my closing remarks is, I think every day for the last 2 weeks, when you open the papers, there's always something about corruption, whether it's in the Senate, in the National Assembly, outside there, you know, or some improprieties like riparian lands, you know, road reserves and all that. And yet every day, side by side, we see people politicking at the lowest level, whether it's the ward, at the constituency, at the county, those who want to be governors at the national level, you know, going around and still giving money and all that. And we as citizens, we decry the death of integrity and the corruption and the non-inclusivity on the one hand, and yet we celebrate the giving of money and all the others on the other side. I think I want to challenge us all as Kenyans, that from the lowest level, which is the ward, to the highest level, which is the nation, can we then start practicing what we are preaching? If we want integrity in office, if we want inclusivity, can we start by focusing on that so that then we get leaders who will practice that rather than get leaders who, after we elect, then we start attacking them for doing the opposite.
Thank you. Wamatangi, briefly.
Well, I thought that I would have had an opportunity to get the story you ran on page 6, you know, which is about, you know, that plot that senators sought 100 million shillings bribe, you know, and I thought so. I had wanted us to get there because that's a committee in which I sit in.
Okay.
And you know, unfortunately, we didn't have time to go into this. But let it be my closing remark that you know, it's very sad, Debarl, and I want to put it on record that for the committee which I sit in, for us to have arrived at the conclusions that we arrived at and made that report, it was not an easy journey. We have, I sit in that committee, and we have had to face not only intimidation, actually we faced threats, serious threats from several quarters. Even as the chairman said yesterday, even threats on our lives. And I want to be on record as one day myself, when I questioned one of the senior people in government and walking from parliament, somebody followed me as I was going to a hotel and told me, don't you think it is time now for you to take care and watch over your life? And